moving on, we're going to hear the next keynote speech delivered by Professor Ryu In-gyun of Ewha Women University. Professor Ryu is a professor in the College of Pharmacy at Ewha Women University and also serves as the president of Ewha Brain Institute. He received his Bachelor of Medicine and PhD from Seoul National University College of Medicine. And he also majored in neuroscience at Harvard Medical School and served as a full-time lecturer in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and also a professor in the Department of Psychiatry, Natural Science at Seoul National University. And he also was an adjunct professor at the University of Washington and University of Utah. Professor Ryu is an expert in brain science, psychiatry, and brain imaging research and has published more than 170 papers in a number of internationally renowned journals such as the JAMA Psychiatry, American Journals for Psychiatry, and Molecular Psychiatry, and Nature Communications. So, as he's ready to deliver his keynote speech, why don't we welcome him with a big round of applause?
It is my great pleasure and honor to be able to have this talk, and I thank all for this occasion, and especially I thank for this invitation ASEM Director Ji-eun-hee and Lee Hae-kyung, and for this forum Chairperson Song Do-han and National Assembly Woman Kim Sang-hee. And I'd like to deliver a couple of clear messages about healthy brain aging. Since I know that my wife clearly knows that I'm not bright, so I'd like to focus on a couple of clear messages. And I have to work hard for about 15 to 20 minutes. My wife always recommends that I have to work hard, especially when there is a free meal after the talk. So I will first talk about brain development and maturation in children, adolescents, and young adults, and then move on to brain aging and compensatory changes in healthy seniors. I know that Dr. Leo preferred the terms of older persons and older people rather over the seniors or other terms, but I'll change it later. And then I'll move on to the psychosocial factors in brain function and late-life depression, and we'll come back to the suggestions for improving mental health and brain function. Pediatricians always say that children are not smaller versions of young adults, and I also know a little bit about this. Children, we need to add something like lots of minivan visit to soccer field to change the children to young adults, and like some pension fund and lavish life and cruise to sacrifice all those opportunities to move the children to young adults. And young adults, and we add some stupidity, and young adults will change into the middle-aged adults. And middle-aged adults probably will be transformed into older adults when we add some wisdom, at least for some women. Older adults, at least from the perspective of the brain, they have different function and different structure of the brain and different need for the brain. So it's not just numerically greater, larger versions of the middle-aged adults who will look in more detail into the brain part in this presentation. As we see that from the 7 years to 70 years, overall that there are decreases in brain volumes and thinning of the cortical thickness. Brain size reaches its maximum size at about 18 or 20 years old. Let's say it's 20. And then brain size decreases about 3% by the decade. So if you are 30, 3% decrease. 40, 50, 60, it's like 12% decrease. 70, 15% decrease. So in a way, it's a substantial decrease in terms of brain volume. But there is another story to this. We'll look into that. First, in terms of cortical thickness, cortex, where the many important brain cells located. When we open our eyes when we are infants, we need to see. So brain, like it matures in the rear part of the brain, and when our brains become more effective and efficient, we just prune unnecessary part of that cortex, and the cortex becomes thinner. So the thinning is not always bad. So, and then the infant stand up on foot, and then the sensory part and motor part becomes thin in the cortex. And when the children grow into the adolescence, they need to control their behaviors and instincts. So in adolescence, the frontal part of the brain, where all the regulation and inhibition and modulation occur, they need to control their behaviors and plan for the future. So the frontal part of the cortex become more efficient, and then the frontal cortex becomes thinner. So thinning doesn't necessarily represent bad things. So thinning in a way represents efficiency. So we can say that thinning occurs throughout the lifespan, but at the same time it can represent efficiency. So thinning or decrease in volume itself doesn't necessarily represent decrease in function. As you see that 20 to 50 years, there's a decrease, a continuous decrease from 20 to 50 years. And then over 50 years old, additional decrease occurs. So, but it is more of a physical snapshot of the brain rather than the functional decrease. We all know that a collection of knowledge and increase in wisdom occurs beyond 20 years old. Like it can occur, it continues beyond like 30 years old, 40 years old. The knowledge and wisdom collects and it expands. As if you see more further into the details in different regions of the brain, this is a frontal part of the brain where it's a mediation, inhibition, modulation, thinking, planning occurs. There's a sustained decrease in gray matter and white matter occurs in most people. But it doesn't necessarily say that bad things are happening or a decrease in functioning occur. If we see the amygdala part, that is the more of an emotional regulation part. In the lower left corner, the black line, as you see that the volume of the amygdala still remains solid through the 40, 60 years old, even through the 80 years old. But the red line is for the Alzheimer or cognitive impairment, let's say memory impairment subjects. So there's a substantial decrease in those groups. If we move to the hippocampus, the next to the right, the same thing happens similar to the amygdala. In the healthy old people, senior citizen group, hippocampus, the volume of hippocampus stays similar to the middle-aged group. But in the mildly cognitively impaired group or dementia group, the hippocampus, where all the memory-related things are happening, it decreases fast. So we now know that if we stay healthy in terms of the brain, gray and white matter stays similar to the normal or healthy subjects, but amygdala and hippocampus volume or function and structure decreases fast. So we need to stay healthy in terms of amygdala and hippocampus, where the emotion and memory are relevant. So in terms of memory decline, or in its severe form, the dementia group, that's where the problem occurs. But even though the brain aging is a natural phenomenon, we don't need to go to the a dementia side or cognitive decline side. If we stay, although there are lots of factors that are related to dementia, like genes, hereditary factors, or physical illness like vascular factors, but we can also stay into the healthy, advanced aging side. There is an interesting study, like when a young person, adult, and an older senior, let's say just a senior citizen, do the new intellectual task, completes a new intellectual task about the same time. So it is the same. But during that time, their brain, the young person, his brain probably uses a lesser part of the brain regions, whereas the older person uses multiple regions of the brain, but the output is the same. So we can definitely say that human brain has the cognitive reserve, and the senior citizen did it with flying colors, with some compensatory recruitment. That is for the new intellectual task. For some familiar task, let's say the grandpa has been making the dinosaur with the Lego blocks for months for his granddaughter. I think that the grandparent can beat his own son for this familiar task. Also, for the affective experience, they have different strategies. For younger adults, they tend to use more of an instinctual part of the brain, emotional part of the brain, like a subcortical part, whereas the older adults tend to use more of a thinking part, meditating part, thinking part of the brain. It doesn't necessarily say that older adult doesn't have a heart. They have the heart, but it's more by comparison. They use their more of a frontal part. I think that they also use the emotional part, but what's more prominent for older adults are their thinking and meditating and modulating part of the brain. So what's important here is healthy older adults, seniors, have different coping strategy, and different cognitive reserve and compensatory recruitment. So it's not just like they are numerically greater versions of younger adults. So we need to take this into consideration when we plan for their treatment or for their social support. So we'll go into mental health and brain function in the older people. Well, when you talk about the late-line depression, we all know that depression is related to the psychosocial factors and brain biological factors. Psychosocial factors, I know that many distinguished speakers will be talking about poverty and fear of death and loneliness are related important psychosocial factors, and biological factors are also important. For example, COVID-19 is related to the, let's say it's COVID blue, and it's related to increased additional risk of depression and anxiety disorders. And it's also related to social isolation and also a little bit different in loneliness. Conventionally and traditionally, they say that psychosocial or psychological things are more of a reactive, and it's not written in the brain, and it's more of a cannot be easily observed. But let's see it this way. Loneliness can be observed clearly, and it's written in the brain. In the brain regions, brain volumes of the regional volumes can be increased and decreased as you see this, and important brain networks it can be changed according to the severity or levels of loneliness. So it's not just the psychological or psychosocial factors. Loneliness should be taken with a substantial weight. And not to mention the biological factors of frontal cortex or the amygdala or hippocampus, which we discussed a few slides ago. As you see that, prefrontal cortex are important. When we have problems in prefrontal cortex in depression, it is quite closely linked to the risk for suicide. And also, when it's related to decreased volumes of amygdala hippocampus, it's related to also with suicide. So, I have some suggestions for improving mental health and brain functions today. Social interactions and support. When we improve the social in any type of social interactions and support, it can mitigate negative emotions via controls over amygdala, which is related to the emotional outburst, as you see it here. Also, as you see it here, probably via prefrontal cortex. You can remember that in adolescence, you control your prefrontal control. Frontal cortex thins when you have more control over in adolescence, and your control of the frontal cortex increases over amygdala, and then you control your negative emotions. So that's important for the mental health in the senior citizens, just like you see it here. So social interaction and support is really important. And increasing the positive emotional experience is very closely linked to the cognitive performance. So it can increase the cognitive performance. It's the same. Finally, there have been medications for dementia, but it's limited. There haven't been any new medications for almost 2 decades. But there's a new one earlier this year, but it's limited. Depressions are not responsive in 1/4 of all patients. So we have to do something before it goes deeper into the dementia or deeper into the depression. So even though it sounds too easy, but it's not just you just do exercise or you just have some social interaction or increase the positive emotion. It's written in brain. It has evidence. So I think it's really important also for the senior citizens' brain and mind and heart that if we increase the social interaction and positive emotion in older people, I believe that it'll increase the brain function and thereby it's linked to the improved mental health in the older people. Thank you.